In our latest Foul Play Files installment, we examine the life, death, and investigation surrounding Leonard Koenecke, a promising player for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Did the shortened life of a player who died mid-flight cut short a career that had great moments still to come? Could his demise have been prevented? Most importantly, should he be remembered for more than just his tragic ending? Let's learn more on today's episode of Rounders, A History of Baseball in America. Hey, baseball fans. Welcome to Rounders, your baseball history podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lambert. Get ready to step into the time machine with us, and we're not just talking stats and scores. We're digging into the heart and soul of the players, teams, and countries that have made this a global sport. From the underdog stories to those jaw-dropping moments, Rounders is your front seat to the epic journey of baseball. So grab a seat in the digital bleachers, relax, and let's swing for the fences together. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode. It's been a couple weeks since I put out any new content. Thanks for bearing with me. Spent the month traveling with my family. We went out of country, went across the country, pretty much everywhere I think we had on our bucket list to go through. So it's been a very relaxing couple of weeks, just being able to reconnect and be able to just enjoy personal time. But I'm back in the studio. I'm excited for the upcoming topics that we're going to be covering here at the end of July through August if you're listening in real time. If you are not a member of the newsletter, you can get updates to see what's going on and what's coming up. All you have to do is subscribe to rounders.substack.com. It's the best way to be able to monitor what's going on if you want a little bit more than just the audio version. So with that said, thanks again for sticking in. Today's episode is going to be added to our series, our ongoing series of what I've called the Foul Play Files. Now, if you're new to the show or if you're a recent listener, you may not be familiar with this series that we've had going for multiple years now. It's where we look at players who are involved in situations that either led to their death or events that changed baseball history in some way that involved criminal activity or things that are opposite of the law. So to give you examples, we've done episodes such as the one about Ed Delahanty, who died mysteriously by falling off of a train as it went over the Niagara Falls. We talked about the cocaine scandal that happened in the 1980s in Major League Baseball. We look at different things, different aspects of players' careers and teams. It's a way that I wanted to be able to show baseball's, I guess, dark underbelly. And we're going to continue that today by looking at the life of one Leonard George, who died not mysteriously, but certainly tragically. And there are some questions surrounding his death. It's what he's remembered for, but that also overshadows a career that looked promising in some ways. So we're going to recap who was this guy, what happened that caused the events that led to his death, his premature death, and of course, how should we remember him? So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our topic for today, Leonard George. But before we dive into the events surrounding Leonard Koenecke's demise, let's take a minute to get to know the man. So Leonard was born on January 18th, 1904 in a small town called Baraboo, Wisconsin, which is this very rural town about 40 miles northwest of the state capital of Madison, Wisconsin. He was the middle child of Herman and Lydia Koenecke. Now, Herman, the father, was a railroad engineer. So keep that in mind because Herman, like his siblings, went through school, graduated from high school in 1924, and then made the decision upon graduation that he was going to follow in his father's footsteps. And he secured a job as a fireman for a local railroad company. Now, Leonard was a big dude. He had a physically demanding stature. Remember, he's doing things like shoveling coal into locomotive engines, and that turned him into a real bull of a man very quickly. Teenager to young adult. He was listed as 5'11" and 180 pounds. And he was described by peers as having what one newspaper article quoted as saying, hulking shoulders and powerful arms. And another article stated that he had a, quote, impressive upper torso. So there was a third article that also said that Leonard was a, quote, physical specimen to behold, end quote. So Koenecke's a big guy. He's built to play sports. but he wasn't really familiar with baseball. You could say that his introduction to the sport was almost accidental. I mean, he knew about baseball. He even was quoted as playing some in high school. So he was familiar with it as a game, as a diversion, not as something that he could do to make a living. But since he was working on the railroad, he had a chance to meet people from very diverse backgrounds. And while he was on a railroad run, he encountered a brakeman named Murray Boyle, who was a former minor league baseball player. And he played and managed for a local team in Escanaba, the town team, for baseball. And he asked Koenecke and said, "Would you like to play? You're muscular. We'd like to try you out as our backup catcher." So Koenecke was interested and agreed to join the town team. So early notes that I was able to find on him, he was noted as being, quote, unpolished defensively, and we have to forgive him for that. He had no prior experience as a catcher, but he did have natural hitting ability. He was a left-handed bat. He threw right-handed, which of course is especially during this time, a huge plus, huge bonus. So he took to the sport, started playing for the town team, and liked it so much that he decided that he wanted to play for other town teams that were looking for players. And he took a leave of absence from his railroad job to pursue baseball full time. So after playing for that Escanaba team, he tried out for other town teams. The following summer, he even made it all the way up to playing semi-pro ball across Michigan and Wisconsin. So that leads us to, when did his professional career begin? So we have to fast forward to 1927, about 4 years after he had signed on to become a railroad fireman. So he started off by playing in town ball teams, primarily as a catcher. He was able to land a gig with the Class B Springfield Senators of the 3I League. So he landed that job, not so much for his defense, like we stated before. He had some shortcomings there, but he certainly showed a lot of promise at the plate. That season, playing for Springfield caught the eye of scouts for other teams. That led to a contract for the next season with the Class D Moline Plowboys, also nearby. He successfully converted into an outfielder that season. The team saw promise in him and said, "We need to get you out the catcher run because your skill is not there defensively." They moved him to the outfield. It was a good move. He was a serviceable outfielder. But again, his skill was at the plate. He established himself as a dominant hitter that season. He hit .343, and he led the league with 20 home runs in 117 games. The season after that, he returned to the Moline Plowboys, improved his average to .389. He racked up 182 hits and hit 22 home runs. Remember, 2 more than the previous season of 20. So Len is catching eyeballs with how well he's playing. Remember, he's in Class D right now. He's trying to get up to the big leagues. He actually has his contract purchased later at the end of that season to the Class B Quincy Indians. And the Indians liked what they saw, and they move him up even higher in that same organization, where he starts to play for the Class AA Indianapolis Indians of the American Association, which is the highest level of the minor leagues during this time before you can get into the big clubs. So there, in just 17 games in Class AA, he hits .394 with 4 home runs in 17 games. He returns to Quincy the next season to play a full season, and he ended up splitting time because he started off the season by hitting .329 with 13 home runs, gets called up again to Indianapolis, hits .319, ends up in 1930, the next season playing for all those different levels again, Springfield, Quincy, Indianapolis. He maintains a .349 average with 10 home runs in 58 games in the lower leagues. And his average, once he got up to Class AA again, started to dip a little bit. He went down to .250 with 10 home runs in 67 games. But the point is that he has become a known asset in this organization. So that brings us to the 1931 season. This was his breakout year. He went from that promising player to a top-rung minor league star. He played a full season in AA Indianapolis. He batted .353. He led the team with 224 hits. He had 19 triples and 24 home runs, and that earned him a spot on the American Association All-Star team. So that exceptional year started to drive even more significant attention from other big league scouts that wanted to purchase his contract and get him on a big league team. But this is where we see the first tough decision show up in Len's life. See, he had to choose between baseball and another important event in his life. So in 1930, he decided to get married to a girl named Gladys Stoltenberg. And they had a daughter in 1932 named Anna. So this added a family in terms of responsibilities. Now he has a child and he has to take care of them. So his financial situation becomes more precarious. So remember, he took a leave of absence from his railroad employer to pursue baseball full time. And they were starting to get impatient with the fact that he would be there during the off seasons, but during the summer, he would be off playing with these teams. So they gave him an ultimatum and said, look, you can go and chase a full-time professional baseball, go with God's blessing, or you have to stay with us and play year-round. Shouldn't say play year-round. You have to be employed full-time with us as our railway fireman. So Len, with a family to take care of, has to make a really tough decision, and he chose baseball. So this decision, I think, is something we don't really talk about a lot in baseball history that I've seen. And that's just how financially precarious it was for players early on to pursue professional careers without some sort of day job. It wasn't possible. And even still to this day, minor league players make so little when it comes to being able to follow their dreams full time. And Len had a tough decision to make with the wife and child at home. But he said, you know what? I'm going to give baseball a full-time shot. So let's see how this worked out for Len. Remember, he had that standout 1931 season with Indianapolis, catches the eye of scouts, but particularly one scout's report catches the eye of John McGraw, who's a legendary manager for the New York Giants. Now, despite some concerns about his health, McGraw was so excited about Koenecke that he took a train down to Indianapolis to see if this kid was the real deal. So McGraw sees him, watches him play a couple games, says, we got to sign this guy. So he approaches Koenecke and says, we want to sign you to the New York Giants and we'll pay you $70,000 as a contract, which is big money for the time period, folks. This is a substantial sum. And it was actually picked up in the papers as the Giants picking up a, quote, new $70,000 wonder boy, $70,000 wonder boy, I should say. So this is Koenecke's big break. He gambled on baseball, and here he is. This is his big chance. He's got a big contract. He's going to be starting for the Giants. So how did that go for him? The 1932 season rolls around. He makes his major league debut. He gets to play in the Polo Grounds. Oh my God, right? So first game, April 12, 1932, wasn't great. He went 0 for 4. A couple days later, he did hit his first MLB home run. So this initial stint was rough for Koenecke, to say the least. He only played in 42 games in 1932. It was okay. He batted .255, but the scouts' takes and the newspaper quotes I could find, he was generally considered to be poor compared to his minor league performance overall, how he did in the big leagues. He was also older. Remember, he's in his late 20s, so he's an overaged rookie. There were also concerns about his clubhouse behavior. So there was one newspaper report that said he had, quote, a fragile ego, end quote. And he was also very quiet, according to his teammates. So the Giants were known for having a very close-knit ball club, very close-knit clubhouse, and Len was not fitting into that mold of what McGraw wanted out of players that joined his club. So there started to be some concerning reports coming up. The concerns were enough where the Giants made the decision after 42 games to send Koenecke down to Jersey City, the Jersey City Skeeters of the International League. He played well once he ended up down in AAA, batted .355, 18 home runs in 95 games. So he obviously has pretty well mastered the highest level of the minors, but that translation to the big leagues had not really occurred for him yet. He finishes out the season in the minors, but 1933 rolls around. He's been signed to a big contract. The Giants expect him to play to performance level. Unfortunately, they decided not to call him up, and he spent the entire season with the Buffalo Bisons, who are also in the International League. His contract was lent over to that squad. He played well. He hit .334. He played 161 games. He had 100 RBI. He was named an All-Star for the International League. He also showed more defensive ability in the outfield, posted a respectable 980 fielding average. His performance in the big leagues was enough for another team to want to take a chance on him. So the Brooklyn Dodgers called up the Giants and said, we'd like to purchase Len Koenecke's contract. And he was actually sold over to the Dodgers for the 1934 season. Now, the manager of that club was none other than the great Casey Stengel. And he reportedly believed strongly in Koenecke and drilled him all spring to help him regain his confidence in the field and at the plate. One newspaper report said that Koenecke had an excellent showing in spring training. So there are high hopes for him going into the 34 season with a new team. And he did well. He batted .320, he had 31 doubles, 70 walks, 14 home runs, and he did that in 123 games. He also set during that season a new National League record for outfielders with a .994 fielding percentage. He only committed 2 errors in 318 chances. So that placed him amongst the league leaders in several offensive categories, that performance that he had that season. Let me give you some examples. He finished 5th in on-base percentage. He finished behind guys like Hall of Famers Archie Vaughn, Paul Wainer, Mel Ott. He finished 8th in slugging, 3rd in walks, 4th in OPS. I mean, that season solidified him as the up-and-coming player for the Dodgers, and there was a lot of optimism about him in the clubhouse. But keep in mind, the same things that happened on the Giants followed him to the Dodgers. He was starting to see success, but according to some newspaper articles, he was still known as being, quote, low-key, generating little sports writer ink, end quote. He was described as a, quote, professional during games, but quiet in the clubhouse, and a colorless family man away from the diamond, end quote. That was from the New York Times. That was a really interesting one. So there are some concerns about his ability to gel with his teammates. Did not a strong communicator, I think, tended to keep to himself. Just keep that in mind as we get further into Len's story. Let's talk real quick about his 1935 season. Remember, he didn't have a very long career. He comes back to the Dodgers. He's expected to do even better than he did the previous season. But remember, he's an older player. He's 31 years old now. He struggled this season. He started the season for the Dodgers with a recurring foot injury that forced him to miss some games. He only played 100 games for that season, unfortunately. His batting average was good. It wasn't as great. He dropped to .283. He only had 4 home runs during that 1934 season. There was one article that said that he included a, quote, drop in batting average, increased strikeouts, and more errors, end quote. So by mid-September, towards the end of the season, he was found to be mostly on the bench. Wasn't a guy that was starting anymore. He was brought in every now and then for a pinch hit opportunity, but manager Casey Stengel seemed to have very big concerns about him being able to deliver offensively, even though he gained a lot of that trust during that previous season. And a lot of it could be tied into the foot injury. I also found an interesting article saying that Koenecke, there were concerns about his weight management, that he was considered overweight when he showed up to spring training during that 1934 season. So that could have contributed to his poor performance. So Koenecke seeing his career start to hit the skids. And I'm sure there's financial anxieties there. He signed that initial big contract, but he's only through his 3rd season. He's in his 30s. How's he going to keep this going? So this all ends up leading to an unfortunate end. So real quick, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the fateful end to Len Koenecke's life and the fallout surrounding it. See you in a second. Let's continue talking about Len Koenecke, folks. We've had a chance to learn about his background as a person, his short career. Let's talk about what happened, what caused his unfortunate early death, the investigation surrounding it, what could have been, all those things. So let's go ahead and start off. We're going to pick up our story again in 1935. Remember, 1933 was his breakout year, did great, was considered kind of a wonder kid coming up. Now, unfortunately, 1934 hits. He does not play well. There's concerns about lingering injuries with the foot. There are concerns about him possibly being overweight. He's still seen as a very quiet individual that doesn't really connect with his teammates, and he's not that clubhouse guy that really fits in, unfortunately. So his 1935 season is disappointing to say the least. He put in 100 games. He hit 283, had those 4 home runs. But towards the end of that season, we see the Brooklyn Dodgers make a decision to send him home. Casey Stengel decided he had seen enough, that Koenecke was not even worth keeping on the roster. He was sent home with actually 2 of his teammates, pitchers Bobby Barr and Les Munns. So the 3 of them are said, we're good. We're going to send you home. Make room for other players. So Koenecke, Barr, and Munns decided they're going to fly back. They're actually in St. Louis for a game against the Cardinals when the Dodgers released them. So they have to fly back home. So they board an American Airlines flight that's bound for New York City, and their stopovers in Chicago and Detroit. Remember, this is, short hop flights. We're only in the 1930s here. So during this flight, Koenecke consumed reportedly a quart of whiskey and became, quote, very drunk. So his behavior rapidly deteriorated, according to the reports that I read. And he was described as becoming, quote, belligerent, unruly, and exhibited polluted wantonness, which included harassing other passengers and even striking a stewardess. So the situation escalated to the point where the pilot actually had to leave the cockpit to help physically restrain Len and sat on him. They were able to get Koenecke on the ground. Remember, this is a big dude. The pilot actually sits on him and they're able to shackle him to his seat. My goodness, right? So they arrive at the first leg in Detroit, right? Koenecke was removed and he was unconscious when they removed him from the flight. His teammates, remember, he's with Munns and Barr, they continue their trip to Brooklyn without him, and Koenecke stays behind. They're not going to let him on the flight, the last leg. Len finds himself stuck. He's got to get home. He's been kicked off the flight for completely understandable reasons, but he's still got to get home. So he decides that he's going to charter a private plane to be able to make that last jump back to New York. Yep. So to do that, he gets on a private 2-man, 6-passenger plane that's going to take him to Buffalo, New York. The pilots of this chartered aircraft were 2 individuals. One was named William Mulqueeney, and Irwin Davis. These are the guys flying. So en route to Buffalo on this 6-passenger plane, there was a disagreement that erupted between Koenecke and the pilot and another passenger. Now, according to the pilot's accounts, Koenecke became, quote, violent and uncontrollable, quote, attempting to commandeer the controls of the aircraft with the intent to fly or crash the plane, end quote. Now, please keep in mind, all these statements were collected after the plane landed. So, these are from the police reports and so on and so forth. So we know that something happened in the sky and the pilots felt the need to step in and physically restrain Koenecke, which is not totally unfounded considering that he did it on a previous flight. But let's, look at the rest of the information. In the reports filed after the plane landed, the pilots claimed that they were trying to prevent a crash and did what they claimed was self-defense. So you had the pilot, one of them, William Mulqueeney, who was with another passenger who was involved in the argument, Irwin Davis. They physically got into an altercation with Koenecke. The pilot, Mulqueeney, struck Koenecke over the head with a fire extinguisher that was nearby. There was an account that described the brutal nature of the blows. It's a little rough. Said, quote, the pilot drew back and swung, again hitting the passenger in the face. Blood splashed in all directions, and the pilot swung again. Another headshot, and then another and another, end quote. That same entry also said that Koenecke, quote, crumpled into the back seat in a pool of rapidly spreading blood, end quote. So, Mulqueeney stated that he was disoriented, he was lost in Canadian airspace, and he made the decision to execute an emergency landing at the Long Branch racetrack in Ontario, Canada. Upon the plane landing, it was discovered that Koenecke was dead. He had died from a cerebral hemorrhage. That was on September 17th, 1935. So in the immediate aftermath of his death, the pilot, one of the pilots, William Mulqueeney, the one that swung the fire extinguisher, according to witnesses, was taken into custody along with the other pilot, Erwin Davis. So they were charged initially with involuntary manslaughter. Their defense counsel was headed by Edward J. Murphy, who asserted that his clients were completely innocent, that they were acting in self-defense, and that they were protecting the other passengers from a, quote, drunk and despondent Koenecke, end quote. He also stated that, quote, Koenecke wanted to die a spectacular death, end quote. My goodness. This is an interesting move by the defense, I think, in researching this, because they're basically trying to set up Koenecke as being suicidal in his actions, that he wanted to shift blame away from his defendants, obviously the pilots, and say, Koenecke's 100% at fault. The pilots were reacting and trying to protect him. This story was high profile enough where the judge convened a coroner's jury whose job was to investigate the death even more closely. So there was a Professor Jocelyn Rogers, who was a pathology expert. She testified that traces of alcohol were found in Koenecke's vital organs, and that he believed that amount would, quote, naturally cause a man, if inclined to be quarrelsome, to become violent, end quote. So the jury looked at this information. They looked at the statements from the pilots, from the other passengers. They ultimately concluded that Koenecke had, quote, endangered the airplane and its occupants, and that Mulqueeny and Davis had acted, quote, justifiably in self-defense. So, because of that coroner jury's findings, there were actually no official charges brought against the pilots. No criminal charges were filed, and the pilots were found not liable by the jury. So despite those official findings, we do have conflicting theories that continue to persist, some interesting ones. So there is, quote, of course, the death wish theory that was advanced by the defense team for the pilots, saying that Koenecke was distraught. He was looking for a way to end his life. He felt like his career was over. You also have this claim in a book by Robert W. Creamer, who wrote a biography about Casey Stengel, that there were passengers on the plane that stated that Koenecke made homosexual advances towards the pilots, and that's what triggered the argument. So that is another angle that was looked at as we look at the life of Len Koenecke and the unfortunate demise, of course. We also look at the significant amount of alcohol that was in his system. That has to be a large factor that tied into either his morose feelings or his actions, but alcohol definitely played a factor in this. It probably escalated the situation more so than it had to be. But what were his precise motivations? We don't know. Why was Koenecke, so angry on that flight? What caused the pilots to feel like they needed to take such action as hitting him in the head with a fire extinguisher? So it's a really unfortunate situation. I'd like to think that Koenecke, even though he was in his early 30s, still had something left to give, especially at the plate. But unfortunately, we'll never know because his death certainly came prematurely. The media at the time certainly took every advantage to report on this, and the long-standing opinion about Koenecke as kind of a clubhouse guy that kept to himself, who was quiet, who wasn't really someone who had chemistry with his teammates, didn't help him either in these post-mortem articles that came out. So you have the Eagle, which was a newspaper in New York. They described Koenecke as, quote, a moody, hypersensitive chap. There was another article that painted him as a peculiar, introspective person of a weird temperament. There was another one I found that said that Koenecke was known to never be talkative and generally recognized as a problem player. There was another article that stated that his drinking was widely acknowledged by the teams that he played for. And the media generally avoided talking about that claim that I mentioned in Casey Stengel's book about, the homosexual advances that he possibly did. And certainly you think for the time period, that was not something that was discussed as publicly. So what was the angle? It's hard to say, but the media definitely jumped on this and did not paint Koenecke in a positive light. So how do we remember Len Koenecke? I mean, we know that this guy was a raw talent. We know that he started playing the game later on than most players, came from humble beginnings, took a very physically imposing stature and turned it into a guy that very quickly made noise in professional baseball. He had that great 1931 season that got him the contract for the New York Giants, that big contract. We know that he played well in the minors mostly throughout his career. He saw that glimmer of stardom with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1934. We saw him set National League fielding records for how well he played in the field. We saw that he was seen as a top-tier offensive player, even if it was only for that very small glimmer in time. But unfortunately, those events on September 17th, 1935, leave an unsettling picture of Koenecke. It shows that, unfortunately, that intoxication that occurred led to him being removed from that initial flight. If he had just gotten home in that first flight, none of this would have happened. He ends up on that second flight. He ends up in an altercation, and he ends up dying because of it. So, unfortunately, he's not remembered for those impressive minor league stats or how quickly he rose to prominence for a guy that started playing baseball much later on in his life than others did. In the end, though, we have a gentleman who obviously dealt with drinking issues, who may have had some mental health challenges, who unfortunately was seeing his career disappear before his eyes due to injuries related to physical careers that he had. But we have to keep in mind that people are complex, and a lot of things went into his story outside of just the premature death that we see in the headlines about Len Koenecke. So I hope this gives you a fuller picture of the individual and gives you another opportunity to look at one of the more unfortunate events and outcomes of a player that played in professional baseball. Folks, again, I want to thank you for taking time to listen or watch this episode. It means a lot to me that you make this a part of your regular rotation. Again, if you haven't already, make sure you sign up for the newsletter on Substack so you can get the additional photos and videos and all the things that we also put out. Take a minute. Please follow on social media as well. We're Rounders Podcast on pretty much every platform. And it's great to have you follow and, let me know what you think. I'm always excited to hear feedback from you. I think that about does it, folks. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next weekend. Have a good one. Thanks for joining us for this episode as we explored another amazing moment from baseball history. You can help grow the show by liking us on YouTube and your podcast app of choice. Don't forget to head on over and sign up for the free email newsletter and the bonus show, This Week in Baseball History. Just go to www.rounders.substack.com. A special thanks to our premium subscribers that are helping us grow for just $1.25 a week, and to our starting 9 supporters, Nathan Halverson and Jack Wilson. You are the producers helping make this the top baseball history show out there. See you next week, and remember, there are only 2 seasons, winter and baseball.